Startups are really attractive as employers. They're fast growing, they're innovative, they're getting funded, their founders are in the news, they're trying to make a dent in the universe. But there is also a flip side to working for startups. There is uncertainty, you have to get used to culture. So there are a lot of things that talent needs to keep in mind before they decide to join a startup. And there are a few things that founders and founding teams need to keep in mind before they hire for their startups. What are these things? Let's close the loop on this. So joining me on Close the Loop is Swati Khanna. Swati is the VP of Human Capital at Sequoia, and she's had a long and distinguished career of being a talent champion, both for large companies and in the last 5 to 7 years for some of the biggest and fastest growing startups in India. Swati, welcome to Close the Loop.
Thank you so much, and I'm so glad to be here.
So Swati, I want to start by asking you, do people still want to work for startups, given all the uncertainty that's out there?
For me, it's not really working for startup or for a larger organization. I think everybody wants to be employed. It's a conscious choice of, what option do you take for yourself, right? And I think there people need to self-introspect as to for which kind of opportunity, what stage of company are they the best fit for. And if you want to work for early stage startups, you have to understand that early stage startups are not a cakewalk. You have to come in with an open mind and with a sort of a bent of a mind that you're coming in and, you're finding out with the founder what really, founder is going after and what lies in for the founder and for yourself.
Yeah.
So it's more about experimenting, exploring, building, driving, and growing.
Right.
So if you want to work for startups, make sure that you're coming in to work hard.
So you've seen obviously a lot of talent that has both thrived in startups and also probably just got purged out. So what is the ideal personality type that thrives in a startup?
Great. I think I already just sort of mentioned that. You have to be very, very gritty.
Gritty, okay.
You have to be resilient. You have to have the ability to bounce back. You have to be a problem solver because every other day is going to be a problem. You have to be a hustler. So you have to find solutions.
Right.
You have to have analytical bent of mind. You have to be a thinker. You have to be a thinker. You have to be a doer. I think people who do work best for startups are the types, who can sort of operate at the ground, at the same time have a very, very high level view as well, and oscillate between both based on wherever, your expertise is required.
One thing I found is, so I've worked for about 7-8 startups in the last 15 years. I find that one of the biggest challenges that people who work in large companies have when they move to a startup is there's always a bit of not a bit, but a huge culture shock. Right. So have you seen that with people who move in from large organizations?
Absolutely. I don't think it's a culture shock. It's just that when you're working in a large company, you have large teams, you have infrastructure which is set, you're used to a certain type of working environment. You definitely have that liberty of, taking days off. You have liberty of working in during certain number of hours.
Right.
Like I said, you have resources at your disposal. Now,
Correct.
That's not the case with startup.
Right.
So startups, I think it's more than culture shift. It's just that, shift to a
Context.
different type of
It's a different context.
stage.
Yeah.
So it's more contextual shift.
Right.
Some people ease into it, some people don't.
And that's interesting because some people ease into it, some people don't. So when you're hiring, that's the time when, let's say, it's a pretty strong resume. There are some big brands on that resume. There's some achievements on that resume. How do you test for this?
So see, testing for skills is easy.
Yeah.
It's always easy, but testing for the personality type is hard.
Yeah.
And you can test for personalities that will be able to come and work for startups while they've always done large companies as well.
Right.
And that sort of entails for you to do the behavioral interviews. I think the other thing which sort of also gives you the right kind of insights is the way, the kind of work they've done even within a large company. If they've driven new projects, if they've driven some of these
Intrapreneurial. Right.
Yeah, so those intrapreneurial kind of talent will work very well many times. It's easy for you to identify people who've been high potentials in the large organizations as well. I come from a large organization. In fact, I never knew there was this side of me.
You work for pretty big brands like HP,
I work
DXC.
with HP. So I think for me, it was sort of that discovery from HP to going to a smaller company, which is exchanging. I loved that stint the most. I learned the most in that stint. And that's where the courage to even, start on my own came. And that was a very, very different learning. And I think post my own thing, I sort of resonate with what founders go through when they are building their own startups.
Right.
And I can talk a lot from that founder perspective as well.
Sure. So yeah, let's talk about founders. I think founders, I believe, are cut from a different cloth. I worked for a bunch of them. I'm sure you've seen a lot of them in action. But I think the challenge for founders also is when they start expanding, when they start hiring. How do you get like the first 20 people, okay, you got, but the next 50 and the next 100 and the next 100, how do you get them aligned to, one is the vision, two is the style of working. So talk to me a little bit about what the challenges there are for founders when they start expanding.
Great, awesome. So I think I would probably use an analogy of a child, right? Like when your child is young, your child needs a lot more attention, right? So founders, when the startup is young and early, you need to give a lot more attention. And it's very hard for you to let go and just completely, give that onus to people that you're bringing in unless someone is really, really trustworthy. And it takes a little bit time for anyone to build trust with founders. And I'm giving you this insight, not just, from the founders I've worked with, but also from my own experience. It's very hard for you to just palm it off to someone because you know that you are at a stage where you've not really formed
As a founder,
yet.
yeah.
You're not really formed yet, right? But as you start growing, and again using analogy of a child, as your child also starts growing, a child is becoming bigger, is becoming more self-independent, and it's easier for you to give it or palm off the responsibilities to other people.
Right.
Like you start sending the child to school, then you start sending your child to college, and then you have to completely your child is out of the house. So as your startup scales as well, I think it's that sort of journey. So you have to mature with the startup.
Correct.
And you have to learn to give away, your child to somebody else.
That's right.
So you have to start palming off the responsibility to people that you bring in.
Yeah, I think wearing the shoes of the employee, I think I've seen that a lot of employees, they come with the skill set, they know what they need to do. But I think they also feel very, very constrained because they have the founder looking over their shoulder all the time. Because founders would have done pretty much everything in a company. So when they hire specialists, the specialists also feel that, okay, I know what to do, but I don't have the freedom to do it because I have to convince this person. So that's how it plays out on the other side. Have you seen that?
Yes, it does. See, for a founder, it's always about whether I'm getting an ROI from any resource I'm bringing in the organization or not.
Yeah.
And they'll probably look at it from the narrow lens of what they know. So I think sometimes the onus also lies on the shoulders of the person who's come in to get the buy-in and show them what really the path is.
Right.
So it works both ways. The founder has to show the path to the prospect and prospect has to. So when that alignment happens, it's great.
Right.
If that alignment does not happen, then it's hard.
Also, I think there are stages in the company where it becomes a lot clearer for a founder as to what they need. And usually when it goes to, let's say, beyond Series C or D, when you're almost looking like a large organization, some of these decisions are fairly logical. I think are there certain gray zones in the growth phase where a founder doesn't really know, okay, do I need a senior person? Do I need a hustler? Can I grow someone? Can I just do it myself? Like, are there some gray zones? Is it somewhere between
They're
that?
always there.
They're always there.
They're always there. I don't think I've come across a founder who will say that, all the hires I've made have worked very well for me. So if you've even hired people, even if 60-70% of the people whom you hired and who worked well for you, you've done a great job. Usually it's 40-50% of the hires that work very well for you. The other thing is startups are all about innovating. Right? Many of them are doing things for the first time. And there might not be talent available that has done that in the past.
Correct. There's a scarcity.
So then what do you do in that? Then you have to take a bet on people who can come in and, figure it out along with you.
Correct.
If they figure it out, and there are people who will be able to do it.
So, we spoke about founders, but there's also another entity which is not often mentioned in popular discourse, and that is the founding team, which is the first group
Few
of 10
people.
or 20 who have taken the plunge. How does the founding team react when usually outside talent is brought in or for growth and for expansion?
Founders ideally should never bring in people without taking a buy-in or making the founding teams aware that
or
they
part
are
of the
hiring.
decision.
So if you take your team along, it's very easy. So it's hard when you don't take your teams along.
Right.
Well, there'll be certain roles that you'll need to hire which will be confidential in nature, but not all of them. But if there's like a group that really, is your close circle and you really care about them, make sure you do that. In fact, startups I have consulted with, whenever a new role comes, I usually check with them, is your team aware that you're hiring for this role?
Right.
Because it shouldn't be that, we start soliciting for candidates outside and then your team is not even aware that you're hiring for this role. So
Not even aware and sometimes not comfortable also.
exactly. So I think it's important for founders to do that. In fact, some of the founders whom you'll hear talking about who build great cultures, great teams, I think they always take their teams along.
And you also mentioned something interesting. You said self-introspection is very important. So can you give us a few tips on what a person looking to join a startup should ask themselves?
Great. So if you're looking to join a startup, you should join a startup to learn. I don't think having a monetary incentive as your first, go-to
Yeah.
criteria. Well, money can never be your motivator. Your motivator should be what is it that you're building out of yourself. And believe me, money will follow you.
Is there an ideal age when someone should join a startup? Would you recommend it for the younger lot, or are the mid-career professionals also suitable to join startups?
Well, I don't think there's like any age barrier as such.
Is there an age
like
preference?
I said, it's up to you.
Okay.
It's up to you. I'm hoping that people are talking about ageism today, and I'm hoping in the next 4 to 5 years that won't be a barrier anymore, because I think I'll be there.
I'm already there, so it's okay.
yeah. So I don't think there's any age barrier to join a startup. It's about what you want to do, what you want to get from the job. For me, it's always been about what you learn.
The other aspect, at Loop, we focus a lot on health in general, and of late, mental health has become such an important issue. So one of the things with startups is, and I think we spoke about it earlier, is the hustle culture, because the nature of the business is such that there is no downtime. You're always switched on. You're always trying to solve some problem or the other. Has the whole ecosystem started taking cognizance of impact of this on one's own health, employees' health? Do you see some changes happening in the thought process there?
So I think employee health and well-being is always important. It's just that larger companies have resources to deploy to it. Believe me, startups don't have.
Yeah.
In fact, when we talk about topics like diversity as well, it's slightly hard for you to focus on such things very, very early. I do believe that as a founder, it's important for you to take care of your employees' health and well-being, because you know that you are operating in a stressful environment.
Right.
I believe it's important for startups and for startup founders to focus on health in general, because if your body is healthy, your mind is healthy.
Also, it's one is of course investing in these programs, but also the other aspect of it is even looking at the way of functioning, right? So that might also be a contributor, or even toning it down, or even drawing some lines.
See, I believe any founder who's empathetic,
Yeah.
or any organization that operates on the principle of empathy will take care of their employees.
Right.
So there's no one that, if someone does that, then that's probably brutal or not right. And that happens.
Right.
Because every organization has its own way of operating. Every founder has its own way of thinking. So you can't really help that. But ideally, if there are founders who are empathetic towards their employees, would do that.
Right.
If your employee is not well, you will give them leave. You will give them time to
Got it.
recuperate or heal.
Yeah.
I think that's purely humane.
So Swati, one thing we do on the show is we always allow our guests to close the loop in the end. So if I were to ask you to summarize a few things that startup founders need to keep in mind when hiring talent, and talent needs to keep in mind when joining startups, that'll be really useful for our audience.
Great. So I think the only thing I'd rather say is that there is no good or bad. There's no good candidate or a bad candidate. There's no good company or a bad company. It's always about identifying what's right for you. So startup founders need to make sure that they self-introspect and understand the kind of talent that is right for them, given the stage, given the traits, given the behaviors, given what will help them grow or achieve their short-term and long-term goals. At the same time, for talent also, it's very important to understand themselves, their own intrinsic traits, their own intrinsic values, and what really works for them. And if you make a choice, make sure you try and, make it work.
Absolutely. Thank you, Swati, for joining us on Close the Loop. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.